Of Trump Tower. You're preparing to move to the White House. What will your portfolio be?
My portfolio in the West Wing of the White House will include some communications, legislation. Also, I've been in talks with the president-elect about helping more with data and strategy, because that is obviously something I've done over a number of decades. But all of that is in formation also because we have a number of different needs and opportunities in the White House. There is everything from a White House Office on Women and Girls to Office of Public Liaison, obviously. And so any way I can help with any of those efforts, I certainly will. But on a day-by-day basis, it will be general strategy and advice, walking in privileges, and certainly helping to oversee our whole press and communications operation, which for President Donald J. Trump is very important to him.
Walk-in privileges, how important is that?
I think it's important to continue the relationship I have with the president-elect, which is one of his trusted advisors, and someone who has the opportunity to go in and speak with him on a regular basis, but who would never abuse that. He has made very clear, as they say in the play Hamilton, he'd like me to be in the room when it happens, and that's how it has been, and that's how it has been during the transition, and I expect that it will continue to be as he sees appropriate to my service for him. I have found, on behalf of the president-elect and on behalf of candidate Donald Trump, Steve, that I perform best if, and particularly communications-wise, if I am up to speed on his thinking and some of the different policy implications and decisions that are being made. So in the interest of continuity and in the interest of keeping up with a relationship that has worked, I believe that's what we're going to do.
You understand Washington, you understand power centers in the White House. How do you ensure that there is a streamlined operation in the decision-making process and there's not a lot of infighting among staff?
Well, it's a great question, particularly the first part of your question. That usually falls to the Chief of Staff, and that's going to be Reince Priebus, the current RNC chairman for us. The Chief of Staff generally is the one who limits and funnels the information flow, access to the president, so that there aren't all these, not just competing power centers, but different people in his ear at different times. It can end up being chaotic. I know the staff secretary also has a role in that, traditionally in the White House. And so I'd anticipate this would be no different. You know, we've been a very small, cohesive team here at the Trump campaign in the transition, Steve, in a way that we understand what it means to fight in the trenches together, to truly be in the foxhole, so to speak, together. And so to the extent that that team, or most of that team, are going to go into the White House together now, we have an advantage because we don't come from some big laboring bureaucracy where now we have to figure out how to break down these different divisions and funnel it into White House success. It's the way we've operated all along, but I think the staff secretary and the chief of staff himself will have a great hand in funneling that in a way. But I would also expect that the President Trump would continue operating the way he does, which is he takes the advice and counsel from a number of people depending on the issue and the timeliness, and then he ultimately makes the decision.
For you personally, this is a move from New Jersey to Washington, D.C. What's it been like?
It is, Steve, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years. I went to college there, law school, started my business there, have some of my life's best memories and greatest friendships in Washington, D.C. But I've never lived there as a mother of four, and I certainly have never lived there as counselor to the president. So it feels very different. And it feels I have all the responsibility and gravity of what this really means, and I also feel the tremendous, bountiful blessings of just being in a place where I can leverage the opportunities to make an impact in people's lives. It's really why in the end I decided to go into the White House. Number one, I feel the ability and the duty to continue to serve President Donald Trump and Vice President Pence, but also I feel like I have a platform to have a positive impact on people's lives, even if it's a very small part. And it's very difficult to say no to that. I love Washington, D.C. I like New York, but I find Washington to be very green and clean and a bit warmer on a day-by-day basis. It doesn't rain every Monday there. It does tend to rain every Monday here, it feels like. But I'm excited for our family to move there, for my children to have that new experience as well. The schools in Washington, D.C. are phenomenal. And it's going to be a life change, but in many ways, not unlike the president himself. There's still a big piece of you that calls New York home.
I think I read that the vote was not 100% among your kids.
Well, I have a very strong-willed, independent-minded 12-year-old daughter, no surprise. And her moxie and her spirit are really something to behold. Claudia, who's 12, would perhaps like to finish the school year here, which will be an option for her. And her twin brother, George, also 12, he basically has his bags packed and by the door. He's ready for the new adventure. He'll miss very much his friends and his school and his life here in New Jersey and New York, where he's been raised. At the same time, he knows he can always return, and he knows that we are about to embark on a very special time in our family's evolution. My two younger daughters, Charlotte, who's 8, and Vanessa, who are 7, they certainly have a say in it. But Charlotte said, "Mommy, you work so hard, I think you should choose where we're going to live." And Vanessa's excited for her next adventure.
You were raised by a single mom, your grandmother, and 2 single aunts. So what was that like?
That was like being raised by South Jersey's version of the Golden Girls, with the house coats and the snaps and everything. Nobody ever had a conversation about politics that I can recall. They certainly voted. It was their civic duty. It was their constitutional right, and they voted. They probably tilted more Democratic until Ronald Reagan was on the ballot. And the way I was raised was very unique and very special in that I was raised to be a conservative without ever hearing the word. We were raised to be very hardworking, entrepreneurial. Religion was important to us. I was raised Catholic. The pictures in our little kitchen room there were they weren't of Ronald Reagan and John Kennedy, they were of the Pope and the Last Supper, if anything, and something I drew in the 2nd grade. I'm sure it was hanging on the wall. But, Steve, it's very special to be raised by women because you're raised to be strong and independent and to look out for yourself, but with a certain grace and elegance and calmness and respect for other people that I feel has carried me through this campaign many times when it got really rough and tumble and people were very unkind on social media, in my own party, to my face, behind my back, and the same of my bosses, Donald Trump and Mike Pence. They were very mean to them. But I feel like if you're comfortable in your own skin and you've been raised to feel that you have worth and you have value and you have choices, and you're not a victim of your circumstance, you're a product of your choices, and that nobody can make you feel badly without your permission. I was raised that way by those 4 women, to very much believe in yourself and to know that even if you fail, there are always people who love you just for being you, that unconditional love. So I've always known it was a great gift to have this unusual upbringing by a single mom and her mom and 2 of my mother's unmarried sisters. But it was a gift that served me very well as an adult in a very vaunted position as Donald Trump's campaign manager during some very tough times.
So how will you apply that to the White House, to your own role, to your decision-making process, to the backstabbing, as you indicated earlier, and to life in Washington? Because it can be a fishbowl.
Oh, I'm sure Washington, D.C. is a fishbowl, particularly at that level. But I think being impervious to your naysayers and critics helps a great deal. I've tried to show my children a few lessons from this campaign, and I would share them with everyone. One is just the sheer value of hard work and luck. I was in the right place at the right time for Donald Trump to elevate me to his campaign manager and now to be the highest ranking female, non-family member female in his West Wing. And so that's really the fruits of decades of hard work and sticking with it even when it may not have looked like it made much sense. It may not have been lucrative at times. It may have been really difficult to turn and walk away. Not in this campaign, I just mean over a series of being an entrepreneur in a very male-dominated industry, polling and politics. Secondly, the sheer value of being kind to other people. I can't overstate that to you and how it's come back to me in this campaign. People will stop me all across this country, in airports, on the street, certainly, and they'll say some combination of thank you so much for helping the campaign, or thank you for helping to save the country, or thank you, and I'll tell them immediately, I'm happy for the country. More than happy. I'm just happy for the country. It's a fresh start. It's new blood. It's turning the page. It's not just changing the tone in Washington. It's changing the whole channel. We have a great opportunity. But just the sheer value of being kind to the makeup artists, to the Uber drivers, to the people who were part of my staff, to the people above me in the hierarchy over a series of decades in Washington, D.C. In remembering people's names and their spouses and their kids' names and their birth dates. I've been an imperfect person and a flawed professional, certainly, and a flawed boss and employee, but if you're kind along the way, that's what people remember. They don't always remember what you said, but they remember how you said it and how you delivered it. And I saw that come back. People will stop me and say, I didn't vote for Donald Trump, or I don't much care for your administration, but I like the way you handled yourself, or I thought you did a great job for him, or you taught us a lesson about grace and poise and, frankly, ladylikeness. The other thing is, I'll repeat it, just not allowing people to define who you are and what your value is in 140 characters or less, or a bunch of emojis. You just can't do that, and I think there's such a temptation for all of us to just self-immolate into this ball of self-pity and hide under the desk if there's some Twitter screed against you, or Facebook is unkind, or somebody called you a name on a cable TV set. So what? Is that who you are? And that's what I said to my small children. Just by saying it doesn't make it true. Did you just do your homework for 2 hours? Or did you say, my homework's done and it's done? You know, you can't just say it and it become true. So I think that's been a great lesson as well. And I will apply that to the White House, because I had lunch just this week, Steve, with Valerie Jarrett. 8 years in the West Wing for Valerie Jarrett, a top counselor, top advisor to President Barack Obama. And she gave me that advice also. She said, you just have to steel yourself and not worry what other people are saying when you're focused on serving the President of the United States and the people of this great country. And I agree with her.
When did you first meet Donald Trump?
I probably first met Donald Trump in the late 90s. I grew up not far from Atlantic City, and so obviously he was legendary there for a number of years. Donald Trump in Atlantic City, people forget, if you grew up where I grew up, which is about 40 miles from Atlantic City, 20 miles from Philadelphia, working class, blue collar, high school educated in large degree area. When Donald Trump and others built the casinos and tried to revitalize Atlantic City, it brought a lot of jobs to the area where I lived. In fact, my mother worked in a non-Trump casino for 21 years. That's how she supported us. And so it brought a lot of economic growth and vitality, and certainly just sheer jobs and benefits to the area. So I knew who he was firsthand. I probably met him sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then I got to know him better once I sat on his condo board at the Trump World Tower about 10 or 11 years ago. And I showed up at a condo board meeting one night, and in walks Donald Trump, and I thought, he comes to the condo board meetings? But I should have realized a long time ago, Steve, that Donald Trump's going to be very involved in his condo boards and any project that bears his name. So I enjoyed that. I think he associated me with politics. He would see me on TV talking about politics. He knew I did polling. He's always been fascinated with the polls. And so I'd come in to see him maybe twice, 2, 3 times a year, and we'd talk about politics and the polls, public policy. Donald Trump thought about running for president in 2012. I think people know. He had made some of the rounds. We did some polling for him in 2011, and we talked about presidential politics then. People urged him to run for governor in 2014. And I remember attending a meeting in Trump Tower, an icy day. It was January 9th, 2014. I remember it well. And the conversation was people, chairs from all over the state coming to ask him to run for governor. And he had already thought about running for president. But the one comment I made to the group that day is that every great movement needs a transformative individual to help them bring other people along who otherwise have lost faith in the movement, aren't part of it, but maybe should be, want to be, or have sort of are just disenchanted or unenthusiastic members of said movement. The British monarchy has Princess Kate and Prince William, frankly. You know, people looked at the British monarchy as out of touch or stodgy or past its prime, none of which I thought were fair criticisms, but they existed. And I think you have in them this young couple with a young family that has put a new face on the British monarchy that's benefited the entire monarchy and family. The Catholic Church, my Catholic Church, has benefited in large degree by Pope Francis, the People's Pope. I don't always agree with him, but you didn't ask me that. My point is, he's a transformative figure for the larger Catholic Church, and for many people who otherwise are either lapsed Catholics or lost faith in the church or haven't really been involved, or maybe were from a different religion and now believe because of Pope Francis. The Republican Party, the conservative movement, needed a transformative figure to take us away from the dangerous veering towards elitism where my party was going, where the donors had outsized importance, where the autopsy called for things that were so outside of where the base of the party, where the voters really were. Somebody who was a messenger with a message that people felt spoke to them, that was sticky and resonant and relevant to them, the forgotten man, the forgotten woman. And Donald Trump has transformed the Republican Party and the conservative movement into one that values and puts at its center the worker. And that's liberating.
So how do you make sure he doesn't lose his way, that he can become, as you said, that transformative president?
It is my view that Donald Trump will be a transformative president. He will have a positive impact on millions of Americans almost immediately. This is a guy in a rush to do great things. And we got a preview of that all through the transition. He won the election basically 2 months ago. And since then, Steve, he's just been a flurry of constant activity and meetings and phone calls and deliberations and decisions that are truly incredible. And in that way, I see someone who is very steadfast, is very loyal, is very focused and engaged, very curious to learn more at every turn, and he's a guy who's brilliant and knows an awful lot already. And I think that's how you don't lose your way. That plus, if you go back to his motivators in running for president of the United States, they're fundamentally different from the usual motivators for many people in politics, the usual political motivators. Power and prestige and money and status and access. He had all of that. His family had all of that. He has sacrificed a great deal of all of that to run and serve as president of the United States. So what inspires him and motivates him from the beginning, in my view, will serve him very well as he takes on a role to be steadfast and loyal and to perform at the level, and the high-octane level that he has promised.
A couple more questions about you before we let you go. I understand that you were a pretty good blueberry picker.
Packer, yes.
Packer.
We had to put the cellophane over the pint, the rubber band, do that 12 times per crate, and I was the fastest they had ever seen. I'd won world champion blueberry packer, but I learned early on, at the age of 12 actually, Steve, that we got paid by the piece. It was called piecework. So the faster you were, the more money you'd make that summer. So I figured I had devised a whole system of constant motion. I wouldn't move for hours. I would just keep doing that, wouldn't take a water or bathroom break. And those jobs have been outsourced to machines. Maybe they'll come back in the Donald Trump administration, I'm not sure. But I learned an awful lot about teamwork and camaraderie, performance, delivery, quality, consistency, reliability, and entrepreneurship on that blueberry farm. Because there was a great deal of that on display all around me. And at 12, I worked there from when I was 12 to 19 in the summers. And I definitely learned the value of $1 and the value of a hard day's work, a good day's wages for a hard day's work. But at the same time, working as a team, being speedy but also producing quality, being accountable for your results, being punctual, which I'm not always, but you have to be for work. And I thought it was, and then being entrepreneurial. You know, I worked at a farm that was a family business. And like the Trump Corporation, it was truly people who grew up together and were a family together running it and bringing it to the next level. And it's a great memory for me, and I still keep in touch with many of these people. I recently was the Grand Marshal of the Christmas parade in my hometown. And there were about 6,000 people there, 10 protesters. They got a lot of pre-parade ink, but there weren't many of them. But the 6,000 people, it's blueberry capital of the world, and I felt it all over again, how special it is to have grown up in a town like that where people just stick up for each other and pull together and are, you know, a God-fearing, very loving population. Much of it I learned on the blueberry farm.
And also, you describe yourself as a recovering lawyer.
Oh, fully recovered. 12-step program and the lawyer and all. My husband's a practicing lawyer, so I've always thought one lawyer per household is a fine quota. It's plenty. But my law degree has benefited me tremendously because it teaches you to think in a linear fashion, A, B, C, D, problem, solution. I have found as a businesswoman, if not a campaign manager, and I'm sure I'll find this in the West Wing also, Steve, that there's plenty of room for passion, but there's very little room for emotion. And if you can approach problems and opportunities passionately and not so emotionally, you do very well for yourself in business. People respect that and they respond to that. It's how great deals are made. It's how wonderful, steadfast decisions are executed. So that's been, the law degree teaches you how to negotiate. I remember a long time ago, I tell the story, I was invited to give a speech the same time as Mark Mellman. We were going to speak together. My business was a year old, and the man on the other end said, I represent a speaking agency. Do you have an agent? No. What is your speaking fee? And I knew whatever I had said to him in response, I was going to undercut my value, because I was going to be that self-denying Catholic girl raised by these 4 adult women who are also self-denying. And instead of struggling and saying, oh no, it's a privilege to give a free speech, no problem, I simply said, I'll have what he's having, which was a line from When Harry Met Sally that worked out well, because Mark Mellman and I were going to do the same exact thing, give the same speech, take the same questions and answer in the session. So I said, I'll have what he's having. And it was the most I'd ever been paid for a speech by many magnitude at the time, 20 years ago. And ever since then, I thought, when in doubt, just say, I'd like to be treated the same. Instead of screaming about it and passing policies about it, once in a while just say, I'd like to be treated the same way you're treating him. And say it very politely and very ladylike. And more often than not, you get your way.
Finally, January 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as our 45th president. He'll be on the west front of the Capitol. What's his message to America? What will he say?
Donald Trump's message to America the day he is inaugurated is that I'm the president of all Americans, that I believe in each of you, and even those who do not support me, and even those who refuse to accept me at this moment. I'll be here to work for you, and I hope you'll give me a chance. I think he'll appeal